Hi everybody, Amy and Annalie here again to talk about the integumentary system. This is an exciting lecture for me because we're finally getting into the organ systems of our body. We've spent a lot of time talking about chemicals, about basic organization and structural terms, directional terms, all kinds of things like that. But now we're actually getting into the organ system level of discussion. So we're going to spend the rest of our semester actually going through all of the different organ systems. So the first one that we're going to introduce is the integumentary system. And this is a great picture of that. The integumentary system is basically your skin plus different organs like nails and hair, as well as some accessory structures that we find in our skin. Remember, a system is made up of unique organs or individual organs that all work together for this common function. Well, the primary organ of our integumentary system is actually the skin, which is called the integument. The system as a whole, let's take a look at some of those functions that our integumentary system is providing for us and things that all the different organs are working together to provide. So let me get my highlighter out. The primary function of our integumentary system is that of protection. This is the external barrier that we have of our body that protects us from pathogens and germs and things that would get in to make us sick. It also protects us against any type of abrasion, any physical damage to the outside of the skin. The skin is actually quite strong and keeps, allows us to be lightly wounded, to be scratched, and all those types of things and not have it cause permanent damage. We also have a great ability in our skin to prevent water loss. We are able to not walk around dehydrated because our skin is helping to keep the water in. And then another major function of our skin is to protect us against the damage that would be caused by UV light from the sun, UV radiation. So those are the protective functions of our skin, but we also have some additional functions as well. Through the process of sweating, or through our sweat glands, we're actually able to excrete substances, primarily water and waste products like salts, that we don't need in our body. They can be excreted onto the skin surface. The skin is also very involved in temperature regulation. That has a lot to do with the blood vessels that are in our skin. They can dilate or constrict to maintain a steady set point for our body temperature, just like we talked about in our negative feedback section on homeostasis a while ago. Our skin also has lots of nerve endings and nerve receptors, sensory receptors built into it that allow our skin to be a major source of sensory input to the brain. Our skin helps us actually synthesize a particular vitamin. Let me get my pen going for you. And that vitamin is vitamin D. The way that works is that there is a precursor. Let me find it here. So we have a precursor to vitamin D that's in our skin. It's made by our skin cells. That precursor gets converted by UV light, so we need that UV light some. That precursor gets converted by UV light into vitamin D. And without that UV light, we wouldn't have that conversion take place. And vitamin D is needed for calcium absorption in the small intestine. So it's really interesting how all these things work together. But that production of vitamin D is actually a function of your skin. And then lastly, we have another interesting function, and that is that of absorption. We know we've talked about transport among plasma membranes or through a plasma membrane. If something is nonpolar and small enough, remember, it can go right through the plasma membrane of our cells. And that's actually something that our skin has as a function. There are certain types of steroids, certain types of molecules like nicotine, like the nicotine patch, or progesterone and testosterone creams. Because of their chemical nature, they are able to actually diffuse directly through the skin cells. And so some of these medications can be given topically, and they move through simple diffusion into our cells, and then they get right into the bloodstream. So that's a really easy way to administer some of these medications. Let me go to the next screen. Here's a picture of the integumentary system as a whole. Remember we said that the integumentary system is made up of the skin primarily, which again is called the integument, but it also is made up of our hair and our nails and quite a few accessory structures that are embedded within the skin that really help the skin provide some of those functions that we just talked about. Remember we talked about excretion as one of those functions? Well, excretion happens through these structures here called sweat glands. The sweat, the water, and the salts are pulled out of the bloodstream, and then they can be excreted onto the body surface. Here's one of our hairs in a hair follicle, and we also have blood vessels, and we have oil glands here that are secreting their substance into hair follicles, and we have little nerve receptors, some closer to the surface than others, but that provides the nerve input that we need to come into our brain based on what we're experiencing in our environment. Let's take a look at the skin, the largest organ in the integumentary system. So the skin is an organ. It's the largest organ in our body. Sorry, that's bad handwriting. But this skin is composed of two layers, the epidermis, the outer layer, and the dermis, the inner layer. Now, one thing I want you to remember has to do with the different types of tissues. Remember, we have 4 tissue types: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle, and nervous tissue. And every organ is going to need to have at least 2 or more of those tissue types in order to be classified as an organ. So since we're saying that the skin is an organ, we have to have at least 2 tissue types represented. And we do. The epidermis is an epithelial tissue, and the dermis is a connective tissue. You can also see that we have nerve fibers, so that's part of the nervous system represented here. And we have, let's see, muscle. There are actually little muscles that are not shown in this picture, but they are attached to the base of your hair follicles. And when you get really cold, what happens? Those muscles contract and it makes your hairs stand upright. So we actually have all 4 tissue types represented here in the skin. Now, here is another region or layer I want you to see. The hypodermis is not a layer of the skin. It's actually simply used to attach the skin to the muscle underneath. So we actually have all of our muscle tissue under here, and that hypodermis, or that subcutaneous layer, attaches the skin nice and tight to the muscle underneath. That hypodermis is also made primarily of adipose tissue and is used for cushioning and also for thermoregulation or insulation in the body. All right, let's start with the top of the skin, which is the epidermis. So if you take a look at just this basic diagram, if we said that the skin is made up of 2 layers, we have the epidermis at the top, an epithelial tissue, and the dermis, a connective tissue below it. Okay, so the epidermis, let's see what it's made of. It is actually made up of what's called a stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified means multiple layers, and squamous refers to the shape. And it's specifically referring to the shape of the cells at the top edge. So I'm going to go show you what that picture looks like really quick. Do you see these cells here at the top? These cells are pointed and very thin. Even here they have that general appearance. They're just a little thicker and maybe healthier. But that is the squamous shape. Now the cells at the bottom of a stratified epithelium don't have to have that shape name. The name of the tissue is actually named based on the cells at the top of the layer. So let's go back here. These are stratified squamous epithelial cells. Because the epidermis is an epithelial tissue, we know that it is avascular. That means it has no blood supply, because that is a standard characteristic of all epithelial tissues. But we also know that it has nerve endings. We also know that epithelial tissues can have nerve endings and nerve input. So our epidermis follows those same rules. It is avascular and innervated, or it has nerve endings. One of the best ways to think about this is to think about a paper cut. If you've cut your skin with paper before, if it's a pretty mild paper cut, does it hurt? Yeah, it really hurts quite a bit for being such a small cut. But does it bleed? Well, if it's not a really deep paper cut, it doesn't bleed, but it sure does hurt. And that shows you that this epidermis, that paper cut only went through the epidermis, which is avascular, but innervated. Now, if the paper cut goes deeper and you get into the dermis, then you'll start to see some bleeding because you've gotten into the dermis below. Well, before we go into that much more, I want to also tell you that the cells that make up the epidermis are called keratinocytes. Keratinocytes are cells that produce keratin. And keratin is this really strong fibrous protein. So other cells don't have that really, but these keratinocytes are known for their ability to produce massive amounts of this really strong, hard protein. So keratinocytes produce keratin, and that's what makes them unique. I'm going to, I think, stop right here, and we will pick up in the next video. This is going to be what we discuss in terms of the structural arrangement of the epidermis, but we'll start that one on the next video. Thanks!